It's been known for a long time that chemicals in our environment alter our hormone system. And these have been nicknamed endocrine-disrupting chemicals, EDCs, and there's so many in our environment that we don't even think about because it's just in our everyday use, and we're all exposed. But when it comes to little babies, it's very important to try to keep the levels down with these endocrine disruptors because they have such small bodies and it impacts them a lot more than it impacts fully grown adults. So we want their metabolism to get started on a good footing. And so one way to do it is to start preconception, thinking about these things.
This is Fat Science, a podcast dedicated to the science of why we get fat. No diets, no agendas, just science that makes you feel better. This podcast is for informational purposes only and is not intended to replace professional medical advice.
I'm Dr. Emily Cooper. I've been treating patients with metabolic issues for over 25 years. I'm on a mission to raise awareness about metabolic dysfunction and why diets don't work.
Hi, I'm Andrea Taylor. I've been fat, very fat, chubby, morbidly obese, and done almost every diet ever invented. They all worked until they didn't. I've known Dr. Cooper forever, but when I became her patient and we learned metabolism was the real problem, wow, everything changed, and I've never been healthier.
And I'm Mark Wright. It's time for Fat Science.
Wait, does this podcast make me look fat?
Welcome to Fat Science. On the show this week, protecting babies' metabolism. It's a thing, and there are strategies to do it. Welcome to the show. I'm Mark Wright, along with Andrea Taylor and Dr. Emily Cooper. It's great to see you, too.
Hello.
Hi.
Dr. Cooper, until I met you, I didn't realize the profound connection there is between environment and metabolism. So today's show is all about protecting our little ones. You might be a grandparent with grandparenting, babysitting duties. You might be a new parent. Set the baseline, if you would, Dr. Cooper, about the connection between environment. I mean, we all baby-proof the house. You know, we put the drawer locks on and we put bumpers on the coffee table corners, but I don't think any of us have baby-proofed our homes and the environment in our homes in a way that leads to a healthy metabolism for a little one. So set the baseline for us, if you would.
Well, it's a great area because it's at least something we can do, to make a difference because so many things seem to be out of our control. But this is an area where we can focus in and do some things to improve the environment for the newborn, even before it's born or even before conception, actually. So the way the environment affects our metabolism is that it's been known for a long time that chemicals in our environment alter our hormone system. And these have been nicknamed endocrine-disrupting chemicals, EDCs, and there's so many in our environment that we don't even think about because it's just in our everyday use, and we're all exposed. But when it comes to little babies, it's very important to try to keep the levels down with these endocrine disruptors because they have such small bodies and it impacts them a lot more than it impacts fully grown adults. So we want their metabolism to get started on a good footing. And so one way to do it is to start preconception, thinking about these things. And the studies have shown that preconception efforts do alter the genes that we're transferring to the future offspring in a favorable way. If we do these strategies to reduce our exposures preconception, that actually changes the genes that we're passing on to the offspring to make those genes capable of producing a healthier metabolic system in the offspring.
Like, what categories do we look for to think about before you even conceive, or when you bring a baby home, or you have the kids over for the weekend to relieve the parents? I mean, what should you even be thinking about? I mean, before I knew you, like early on, I remember you talked about mattresses. Like, I never even thought about, oh my God, there's dangerous mattresses. Like, there's stuff in the mattress, stuff in the rugs, I never thought about all these things that could be off-gassing or making bad stuff in your house. And of course, then I started to get paranoid too. But I know that there are all these things that can really do some damage to grown-ups. And then you think about, oh, kids are small, they could be even worse for them. So what
Right.
categories do we think about?
Well, some important ways to think of it would be pesticides that we're
Oh,
exposed
yeah.
to. That's one. Personal care products, huge. So that would be cosmetics, fragrance, perfumes, just all kinds of personal care products that have these endocrine disrupting chemicals in them. Construction materials, like in remodeling, that's really important to look at. Adhesives, paints, all kinds of things that are used in remodeling homes. And new cars.
Oh,
If
that
you
new
think of
car
it,
smell?
new cars, new carpeting, all of that is also really laden with potential endocrine disrupting chemicals. So those are some primary areas, even food packaging, containers that we use. So I think a lot of times I talk to patients about just what their exposures might be. And then we find, oh, it could be this, could be a culprit. Like if I find things going on metabolically where we're suspecting there might be exposure to an endocrine disrupting chemical that's contributing, we do like some probing to find out what these exposures could be. Did you get a new car? Have you remodeled your house? Are you, I had a patient the other day, poor thing, telling me, I'm using the hippie shampoo now, but it wasn't working. So we're trying to find, okay, what else could be the exposure? So after switching some of your personal care products, could it be something else? So are you drinking beverages out of cans? Artificial sweeteners. I mean, there's so many things. So we don't want to overwhelm people, but the key, you're asking about the key areas, I really think it has to do with chemicals that we use in the household, whether it's for like remodeling or getting rid of rust in the backyard, spraying our yard with pesticide,
Right.
personal care products,
right,
flame retardants,
yeah, with paint, you can buy
pesticides.
low VOC paint. You
Yes.
can, because there are a lot of bad things in regular cheap paint.
Yes.
So there's a
Yes.
reason why some of the paints are more
And
expensive.
synthetic carpeting.
Yeah.
Commercial construction is really a culprit. So if you work in an office, did they just remodel? Did they just put in new carpeting, new upholstery? That off gassing that we talk about could be happening. And then those particles are dispersed through the air. So these are all just things to think about.
So, Dr. Cooper, when it comes to plastics, I've always been a little bit confused, but you say that there's a plastic lining to a lot of these metal cans and things like that. So when it comes to what to look out for, we talked about it, I think, before, but is it phthalates? Is that the big culprit when it comes to plastics?
Well, it's phthalates and BPA and BPS, but you wouldn't know because, it's not labeled on it what's in it. And even if it says things like BPA free, it's really a marketing ploy because it may be not having BPA in it, but it might have BPS, which is also thought to be just as bad. So it may, so you can't really tell because it's not going to be labeled.
But isn't there a website that you can go to? I think you one time told me about it. Of course, I didn't write it down. There's a website that you can go to, I know, for cosmetics and for something else that tells you, sort of gives you a level of how good or how bad things are, that rates.
There's a couple of
There's a
websites.
couple.
One is called EWG.org, Environmental Working Group, and they have an app that you can scan barcodes and things. There's also Toxic Free Future, which I think is a Washington State one, and they have some good articles. I don't know if they exist anymore. I hope so. But there are some good resources like that. But I think the thing is that you don't want to get crazy about things. But one thing to keep in mind is that, as Mark was saying, phthalates are implicated in altering fetal metabolic development. And so that is really important to look at what we can do to reduce exposure to that. The most common source that they found in the research is cosmetics. So because women often wear cosmetics, and during pregnancy, it gets into their system, and then that does affect the fetal development. Potentially it could, and that could predispose the offspring to metabolic disruption that could persist through their life. So what they found was if you spend just 4 months prior to conception looking at your environment, trying to reduce your own personal exposure, both the mom and the biologic dad, both doing this. And that can really dramatically alter your blood levels and make them much better, blood levels and body tissue levels. So if you are a person that uses fragrance and cosmetics that you're not paying attention to, and you're in a job where you have to use these like Mark was before with the TV
I had
anchoring.
an industrial spray gun, an air gun. You'd put the liquid makeup in a little hopper, and then you'd go and literally spray into my face like every day. And so you looked at me with disbelief when I told you what the process was.
I know. It's so funny because, and so many occupations, it is that way. And people do use these products. And some people, I mean, they enjoy wearing cosmetics too, but you've got to find some that are healthier and past that maybe EWG certification that they don't contain phthalates. But anyway, reducing that is very beneficial. And looking at your food packaging, so avoiding those crinkly plastic water bottles and avoiding canned foods and beverages if possible, because again, the cans are lined with a plastic that contains things like BPA, which gets into your system. It gets right into your system. And other things would be, don't decide to get a new car during that period. Try to get that over with way before then, because it takes about a year to off-gas a new car.
Wow, a year?
A year.
Whoa.
And in commercial office settings, if you change things like the carpeting and make a synthetic industrial carpeting, that could take up to 5 years to off-gas. So it's just, think about not just bringing in a bunch of new food products, upholstery, mattresses, unless they are free of those phthalates and chemicals. And a lot of manufacturers now have certifications on them to show that they are. Like if you're putting in carpeting, you have to think about maybe not synthetic, maybe wool. And then what about the underlayment?
Right.
If you don't want to put adhesives, the baby's room, do we not want to, as Andrea was saying, low VOC or no VOC paints now are available.
What does VOC mean?
Volatile organic compounds, I think. Yeah, they disperse into the air and they contain a lot of bad chemicals for our health. So all these things, just to putting some thought into it. But if for 4 months prior to conception, everybody's kind of trying to lower their own biologic levels, and then you know that the genes you're passing on are not influenced by those chemicals, then during pregnancy, the mom trying to reduce her own personal exposure to these things, continuing to avoid those crinkly water bottles and using things like HEPA filters to filter the air, because if you do have carpeting or something like that, that could be harboring some of these, it's in the dust actually, these phthalates, and avoiding things like, as I said, anything with the word fragrance, air fresheners, just common things that are around the house. It could reduce your own personal exposure. And then having those HEPA filters is really helpful to filter out anything that does get into the air. And one of the kind of crazy things is when you get to the hospital in the labor and delivery, they want to hook you up to an IV bag. And they have also shown that IV bag, unless it's something called DEHP-free, then it contains phthalates. And those phthalates get into the fluid. That fluid going into your system goes to the baby. And now your baby's getting a big dose of phthalates. So you have to have in your birth plan the discussion with your provider to find out. And they'll probably think you're nuts if you bring this up.
What do you do? Bring your own bag?
Well, you can offer to. You can get them. But the more and more hospitals are becoming aware of this now. So sensitive areas now in a lot of hospitals have DEHP-free IV bags. They are made with different chemical compounds that don't do this. And these areas would be like the NICU, the neonatal intensive care unit. More and more, they're starting to shift to non-DEHP bags, IV bags, but it's in all kinds of medical products. And so you would want to ask, I'm requiring a DEHP-free IV bag when I get there to the labor and delivery, and you put it in your birth plan. That's supposed to happen. And they'll say, we have to investigate. And then you kind of have to keep on them to find out if it's going to be available. So, worst case, if it's not, don't panic. But it's just another area where it would be so great if you didn't have to have that exposure. And then that's like leading up to the time the baby's born, pretty much, what things that you can do.
Right. I would assume that the furniture and the rugs you put in the baby's room has all got issues too, because unless you're spending a ton of money, which most new parents and new grandparents probably aren't, it's all going to be wood that is not real wood, and it's going to all have chemicals in it.
Yeah, that's the thing. But as you see, like more and more consumers have driven the industry to shift more in this direction. And so I forgot that you would know, Andrea, from your profession, but the certifications, what is it called? I forgot. But there are certifications on some furniture where it is free of all of that. And so,
but that's the more expensive furniture.
It is probably more expensive, but you don't need too many items.
So that's a good thing.
Yeah. So you could save money elsewhere and just make sure like the mattress is not something, because that's something that they're really up against. And the pillow, well, they're not going to have a pillow as a newborn, but the mattress. And then also like if you've got bottles, baby bottles, I know they're more expensive, but the glass bottles, got to go with glass. Unfortunately, diapers, I hate to say, are also a problem.
Probably.
So, and wipes.
Aren't there new kind of diapers and wipes coming out? I
actually
just saw something. I don't know why it was in my feed, because I don't have anything to do with any babies right now. But I did see something for a new kind of wipes. That were good for you kind of.
Yeah, there
wipes.
are. There's definitely wipes. There's wipes that are just water, water, and you can clean with whatever you want, but it's not full of a lot of chemicals. But there are wipes, there are diapers, there are things you can get. It's just a matter of being conscious when you're looking out there for what's available. And again, it's true. It is more expensive, most likely, but they're coming down in price because there's more of a consumer demand now and awareness.
Right. And I think more people are thinking not just of the baby, but also of the environment. I think that is part of it too. I think you have a combination of people thinking of both humans and the future.
Right. And if you do live in a place where there's been synthetic carpeting and you can't do anything about it, put down, when your baby's crawling on the floor, put down a nice like cotton mat or something so that they're not physically like always crawling around on that synthetic carpeting, and put a HEPA filter in the room to filter out anything that's circulating in the air. So these are just some things to think about. Like hang on to your old car, don't get a new car, or get a used one if you're in that newborn mode. And I think, that's a little bit of focus on the environment can make a big difference to the really small babies that are developing. You may have the situation where there are complications or something, and your baby needs to be in the neonatal ICU for a period of time. That environment is known to expose them to a lot of these endocrine disruptors. It's just known. Even if they use the DEHP-free bags, there's other tubings and there's other stuff in there and circulating that they inhale. And it's not, going to really make a huge impact on their health in the long run. But then you want to be more careful too when they come home to make sure their environment is really free of that you can reduce those levels over time if they did have any exposure. But yeah, and I think if there's genetics, family history of obesity and diabetes, those are the babies that are affected the most by these exposures.
I was going to ask you about that, Dr. Cooper. When you say that these endocrine disruptors get into the system, how do they manifest? And what impact, comes about as a result?
They alter our hormone levels. So one of the ones is adiponectin that we talk about. That's such an important hormone from our body fat that prevents heart disease, strokes, diabetes, and obesity. And it's such a beneficial hormone, but it gets very suppressed when we're exposed to these endocrine disrupting chemicals. And then when it's suppressed, we can end up with insulin resistance, elevated body weight, diabetes, inflammation in our blood vessels, hypertension, heart disease. And so it's really can have a huge impact. In fact, there are studies where they had people drink a beverage, a canned beverage, then measured their blood levels of, in this case, it was BPA, and their blood pressure for 4 hours after drinking, just right immediately after drinking. And their blood pressure just continued to increase. So they did the placebo where it wasn't, and the can with the BPA, which is the more common. And the blood pressure increased and the blood levels increased within that 4-hour period. And so it has an immediate effect on us as well as a long-term effect. And so I think it's critically important. And that's just one hormone that we're talking about, but they can affect many other hormones.
Yeah. Isn't it kind of frustrating, though, that when you look at the development of all these chemicals and the companies who manufacture these chemicals, the human health impact is almost an afterthought. And it's like other people are having to discover that BPA is bad for us and phthalates are bad for us. And it's like, but these companies, I understand why they're developing these things, because it makes sense to line a metal can to preserve the food longer. And it makes sense from that aspect, but it really is frustrating that all of these detrimental effects, and I guess the larger question, Dr. Cooper, we have epidemic levels of diabetes and epidemic levels of obesity in our country. How much of that epidemic, those epidemics, are tied to environment? Or is there even a way to know?
Exactly. I don't know if there's a way to know, but we do know that for about 90 years, we've been exposed to these chemicals, and or probably longer, but it was about that long ago that the scientists knew that they were affecting our hormones. So we've known for almost 100 years that these chemicals affect human and animal, like in nature, all of our organisms that we're living with on Earth. The scientists have known that these are hormone changing chemicals, and we haven't done anything about it. So I know I keep saying this, but there is some good news because just recently they passed some legislation that has started to really crack down on this and changed our EPA focus to really looking at the endocrine disrupting effect of a lot of these chemicals that we haven't really been looking at closely enough. But this whole thing takes so long that we can't rely on that. We have to, as consumers, just take it in our own hands. And if it turns out that they're not that damaging, fine. But they might be critically damaging. And in other countries, they've taken much bigger steps in Europe, Canada. So I think that could be why some of our patients, whenever they travel, they feel better and their metabolism is working better. And they come home and they're telling me nothing has changed. I don't know why now my blood sugar's higher, my blood pressure's higher, my weight is higher. I really do think it probably has to do with our environment and how far we've let it go. So I think that people thought, wow, isn't this cool? There's this chemical that takes rust off of, these boats or whatever. We could spray them with this. And it turns out that that's really bad for our endocrine system. So I think you're right. There's a disconnect. And I'm even noticing with a lot of the environmental talk, there's disconnect because we're focusing a lot on the use of recycled materials. But a lot of those materials are plastics. So we're marketing it as though it's a healthier choice. It really isn't healthier biologically. It might be better for the environment that we're not creating new plastics, but we're not thinking enough about how it's impacting our biology, and we're marketing it as a healthy option when it's misleading.
Well, it's like taking a lot of a bad thing and giving it to you again.
Yes. Let's do it
It's
again.
like, well,
Round 2.
it was bad, but now you can have it again. It's just, now it's all compressed.
Yeah. But that's why they call these things forever chemicals.
Right.
Because we cannot, once they're produced, it's like no going back.
Right.
So we've got to figure it out how to sequester them, how to get rid of them somehow. And that's what these Superfund sites are looking at. It's pretty interesting. I think that there is some movement in a positive direction. It's just, as I say, seems really slow.
But I think awareness is such an important thing, Dr. Cooper. Like if you need green beans, instead of buying a case of, cheap canned green beans at Costco, you could buy fresh green beans and do it that way. And instead
or frozen,
of buying
maybe.
or frozen. Or instead of buying plastic storage containers for leftovers, get glass ones. And
right.
I mean, just that awareness of where this stuff is in the environment, especially, plastic water bottles. We all buy cases of plastic water bottles because they're convenient. But
right.
Gosh, I know my kids' generation, they all have metal water bottles that they take with them instead of plastic. So I think there's a growing awareness there.
And we do have, the benefit of saying, well, okay, it costs more, but that's okay. But not everybody has that option.
Yeah.
And that's why I think it would be great if we do focus on like this clean water effort, because the new guidelines are looking at that PFAS, which is a really bad chemical in our water supply. And they have really cracked down on those guidelines, but no one meets the guidelines right now. Hardly any water supply would. But that is an aspirational goal that is now being put as a legislation, like it has to be we have to comply with that somehow. And so I think that priority is so critical for our health as a population, to get that water to be clean for everyone without worrying about it, because it's not just the plastic bottles, it's what's coming out our faucet. And so I think regardless of your socioeconomic status, we have to have a way that people can stay healthy. And unfortunately, the foods that are like the canned foods and the water coming out of the faucet or plastic water bottles, that's less expensive. And so hopefully there'll be some kind of leveling off of that over the next 10 years. But in the meantime, I think we just have to do what we can. And it's better to eat something, even if it's in a can, than to be starving. So this is just like next level. Let's try to reduce our exposures where we can.
So we've talked about the food. We've talked about their rugs. What about, a lot of parents use pacifiers, and then there's also all the toys. And those kids, they put everything in their mouth.
Yes.
So there's that, and that definitely affects their metabolism. So let's talk about that. What do we do?
You kind of, with these little babies, you really have to be careful what they put in their mouth, because that they can absorb an awful lot of stuff, and that they're putting everything in their mouth. Everything. So also, if you live in an older home where there could be lead paint, of course, leaded window panes. The windowsills are a big source of lead exposure. Right. They lick them. And so you do want to check all that out maybe before your baby's born. There's some really good kits to just check for lead. And if you see that, it is really serious. You've got to keep them away from that. And then things like pacifiers and what they're made of, and toys that are going to go in their mouth. The silicone is really okay for them to be chewing on and things like that. But a lot of things are not. And so that's another area to screen all of that. And I was surprised to find that a lot of like older toddler type toys contain all kinds of things that aren't good. Heavy metals, not good things. Like the costume jewelry that the kids play with, the beads that they play with to do various projects, can contain chemistry that's just not good for our endocrine system or our health. And so I think there is something to be said for like the old fashioned, like get a spoon in a bowl, or a wooden toys, or things like that, like play with things that are just in the environment, and not as many of those plastic toys that we get overloaded with, because they just really aren't good for handling all that. I think washing hands frequently is good too, because again, it's hand to mouth. Like they're playing with stuff that might not be, might have that chemical component to it. And then if they start putting it in their mouth, they're now ingesting it. So keeping that, you don't want to get crazy about it. It's easy to, especially like new parents, but try to just keep everything as simple as you can without adding all of the plastic products that we have in our environment. And the other thing to keep in mind is, unfortunately, flame retardants are also an issue. And those are emitted from TVs and computer screens. And so that would be another area, is to not have your child like touching the computer screen and going right up to the TV, things like that. And you can actually get TV and computer screens that don't emit flame retardants. You have to kind of shop around and look for that. But so it's just having an awareness of reducing the chemical environment altogether. When you have,
as you always say,
yeah,
go back to the way it was grown from the ground,
right,
or the way it came out.
Especially
so a wooden toy,
yeah.
a wooden toy is better than something that came from plastic.
Right, especially little baby and toddlers who aren't fully developed yet. We don't want them to be exposed with these additives in their food and all the chemicals in their toys and their environment.
Yeah, this has been a great conversation, because I think, any change starts with awareness. And like you said, Dr. Cooper, it's not something that we should just be walking around fearful of, but just having that awareness, we can make little decisions every day that lead us to a healthier place. So this is good stuff. I was especially interested, Dr. Cooper, that you said even pre-conception, what mom and dad do in their environment has an effect on what the baby's metabolic system will be like. And boy, it's just something to think about. This is great stuff. Any final thoughts from either of you? Andrea, anything?
No, I think you just always have to think about what you're doing affects the next thing. It's like, it doesn't stop with it just never stops.
Yeah. Dr. Cooper, how about you?
No, I think it's true. And just be easy on yourself. If you can't control all these elements in your environment, it's not the end of the world. It's just things to think about. And as Mark said, making these small changes every day, just giving it a little thought. What could you do a little differently? It will improve the situation, even any efforts that you make in this area.
Well, this has been great information. Thanks to both of you for another edition of Fat Science.
No diets, no agendas, just science that makes you feel better.
I'm Mark Wright. Thanks for listening to Fat Science with Dr. Emily Cooper, a Work P2P production. New episodes drop every Monday. If you've enjoyed the conversation, subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. This production is for informational purposes only and is not intended to replace professional medical advice. Join us next week for another episode dedicated to the science of why we get fat. No diets, no agendas, just science that makes you feel better.